Georgia. Georgia is a country located in the Caucasian mountain range on the border of Europe and Asia. It is a country that was formerly part of the Soviet Union and has only lately established democracy. It has been through years of Russian imperialism, then communism, and has now lately moved on to capitalism and democracy. This country has aspired to move towards the West and strive away from the nation that had conquered it for 2 centuries, Russia. Years of corruption in the government and relations with Russia limited that. But the people's years of romanticism, of uniting with Europe, the will of creating greater liberalism, creating a transparent government, and most importantly, allowing nationalism to flourish, were the reasons why the Rose Revolution occurred. The Rose Revolution was an event that occurred in the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi. This event occurred after President Shevardnadze had rigged the elections of 2003. Georgia had been suffering for years of corrupted state institutions that had stopped the nation from economically and socially developing, as well as gaining territorial integrity. The relations with Russia is what limited Georgia from protecting themselves against wars in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The country was unable to remove itself from its former colonizer and unite with Europe because Shevardnadze and the government would undemocratically appoint representatives of higher ranks through the Soviet idea of nomenklatura. The lack of transparency also limited the country from advancing, and the limit of nationalism and lack of liberalism made sure that it didn't develop further. The country was unable to remove itself from its former colonizer and unite with Europe because Shevardnadze would undemocratically appoint representatives of higher ranks through the Soviet idea of nomenklatura, because of the lack of transparency, the limit of nationalism, and the lack of liberalism. The Rose Revolution was a successful one. It ended peacefully with Shevardnadze leaving office. Soon after, elections were held where Mikhail Saakashvili became president and head of state in Georgia. The people celebrated for the years of corruption and close relations to Russia had finally ended. To what extent was Georgia able to implement the ideas of Locke, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Wollstonecraft, and Smith as an effect of the Rose Revolution? Very often, the ideas of the Enlightenment and the aims of the revolution correlate. For example, in the Georgian Constitution, Article 14 states, "Everyone is free by birth and is equal before law, regardless of race, color, language, sex, religion, political and other opinions, national, ethnic, and social belonging, origin, property and title, place of residence." One of the most influential philosophers of the Enlightenment was an Englishman named John Locke. He was often regarded as the father of classical liberalism, which was something Georgia strove towards. He believed in 3 unalienable rights that all men had the right to, which was the right of life, liberty, and estate. He believed that all people should be respected in the same way, and that all men are equal before the law. He famously stated, "A state of equality wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature, and the use of the same faculties, should be equal one amongst another, without subordination or subjection." These 3 ideas correlate with the Constitution's ideas. They believe that all men are equal and shall be treated equal in front of the law, and all men are entitled to their own residency. Another Enlightenment philosopher whose ideas correlated with those of John Locke's was a Parisian with the pseudonym of Voltaire. Most famous for writing his work, Candide, Voltaire also believed in equality. He famously stated, "All men have the right in the bottom of their hearts to think themselves entirely equal to other men. It does not follow from that the cardinal's cook should order his master to prepare him his dinner, but the cook can say, "I am a man, like my master. Like him I was born crying. Like me he will die with the same pangs and the same ceremonies." Another very important philosopher was a British woman. Her name was Mary Wollstonecraft, and she was one of the very few who expressed her thoughts. She believed that all men, which included women as well, should be equal before the law. If men got equal rights, then so should women as well, because they're all human. She firmly believed in this and expressed her thoughts in her book, The Vindication of the Rights of Women. In this book, she states her ideas about feminism, which is something that the Constitution of Georgia represents, stating that no matter the gender, people should be treated equally before the law. Another important English philosopher at this time was Adam Smith, who expressed his thoughts on transparency in his essays and works like The Wealth of Nations. He criticized guilds and organized orders and violently attacked the corporations. He believed it lacked transparency, distorted competition, and generated profusion and negligence. He supported the free market and believed that this would allow transparency in the business, which was something that Georgia lacked during Shevardnadze and something that Saakashvili and Joania were able to implement into Georgia. Another big contribution into the Enlightenment was taken by a well-educated French baron called Montesquieu. He's famous for his work called The Spirit of Laws, in which he expresses his thoughts on the separation of powers. He was completely against absolutism and therefore believed that if there was 3 branches of government, there would be a balance, and therefore no one separate branch would ever be able to take over in order to create absolute power. This is transferred into today in Georgia. First, there is a legislative branch in the Georgian government that is led by a chairperson that is used to create laws that are later passed by the executive branch. The executive branch consists of 13 ministers and 5 state ministers and ministries such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Education and Youth Affairs of Georgia. It is led by a prime minister, which at the moment is Mr. Irakli Garibashvili, and on top of that is the president of the country elected by the people, which at the moment is Margvelashvili. The third and final branch is the judicial branch, which consists of a Supreme Court and judges. They are used to enforce the laws and are educated on the highest level of law enforcement. Their job is to keep peace upon the country and make sure that everyone guilty is brought to justice and the innocent are kept safe. These were the ideas of Montesquieu, and to this day correlate with the ideas of the Georgian government. Were the theoretical ideas of the philosophers implemented successfully in the Georgian government? There are several ways to interpret it, and since it was only in the nigh past, we are not sure exactly what Georgia will descend into. Some say that radical nationalism is on its way, while others believe that it could lead back to corruption. The ideas of Montesquieu of being balanced in between 3 branches isn't correctly transferred into Georgia, but is slowly advancing towards it. For example, the executive branch has more power than the other 2 branches, but it is not abused as of yet. There is fear that the executive branch could be able to influence the judicial and therefore create an unbalanced and corrupt society. But this is a threat that the Georgian people do not consider, because the Rose Revolution, in their eyes, was a success, that Russian imperialism after 2 centuries of reigning had finally ended, and that Georgia finally became independent, and they were able to display their